Welcome to One Breath Wisdom, the podcast for therapists, healers, and soul-led space holders, ready to lead from wholeness, not burnout. I am Lisa McNett, founder of One Breath Institute and co-creator of the One Breath Method. Each week, I will be sharing trauma-informed insight, somatic tools, and real stories from the healing path, sometimes solo, sometimes with our co-founder, Deborah Dickey, and sometimes with special guests walking this path in their own powerful way. Together, we will explore how healing, embodiment, and presence can transform the way we live, lead, and care for others without losing ourselves. Let's take a breath and begin. Welcome to today's podcast. I am Lisa McNett. We are here with One Breath Wisdom, and I am really excited to be interviewing John Thomas today. John Thomas is one of our students at One Breath Institute. He's been studying with us for a while, and a little bit about John. He lives currently in Ocala, Florida, where he serves as a yoga instructor. He is a breathwork facilitator, as I mentioned, introspective breathwork therapy with us. He is a sound healer, and he is also into permaculture and creating food forests and self-sufficiency. So I just love all of the different ways that, John, that you are working with the body and with nature and with the vibration of sound, all of these different things to support healing. Is there anything more that you would want everybody to know just about your work or what you're currently doing here in Ocala?
Right now, I'm the studio manager of Evolve Power Yoga. I'm also in the process of getting rid of every inch of grass in my property and turning it into a food forest filled with edibles, medicinals, or any plants that help benefit other plants. Pretty much, I don't see anything as being a weed because weeds are just unwanted plants. And to me, all the plants are wanted. So
I love that.
currently, what I'm doing, I've been here for 2 years in Ocala, so it takes a little while to establish these things because a lot of the plants that you use are perennials, which take a few years to grow big and strong before they start producing any food. So right now we're in the beginning and stages of that, but we already have a lot of bananas, dragon fruits, limes, pineapples, Barbados cherries that are producing food right now.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
It's really
It's super.
cool.
I think one of the great things about it is here in Florida is it's growing season all year long, and that's what I love about it.
Do you experience that, or do you ever experience it to be too hot to burn or you just need to use like extra water when it gets really, really hot?
Yeah, luckily when it gets really hot here, it's also our rainy season.
True.
So,
Yeah.
midday, usually we get a nice, a good soak in pretty much every day. So really the only time I have to water is during the winter time. Um, and normally, if it's summertime, I do all the stuff I have to do in the yard early in the morning before it gets super hot. And then I use the middle of the day to work on myself, to do my meditation practice, my yoga, my breath work, research, and other things. I love to go dive deep down into rabbit holes of all different types of knowledge and esoteric teachings.
Okay. Okay. So let's dive into that a little bit. Yeah, I am, what you're very much into. Yeah, you said deep dives into knowledge and wisdom and esoteric and your time for you. You are prioritizing your time, you are prioritizing your meditation, you are prioritizing yourself. So I don't want to overlook that. Mm, I'd love to invite you just to share anything that you want to about how you came to recognize the importance of self-prioritization in your own personal practices.
Yeah, well, I came into my practices mainly yoga, breathwork, and meditation at a time in my life when I was at rock bottom. I was sitting in prison. I was getting ready to face 5 years for possession of large amounts of psychedelics, mainly um, MDMA, mushrooms, and uh, whenever I was there, whenever you get sentenced and you're in the county jail, after you get sentenced, they send you to a place that determines how severe of a criminal you are. And since I was just drug possession, I was considered a minimum security risk. But during this time, they lock you down for 23 hours a day and you get 1 hour out. And that hour is usually spent either trying to take a shower, which you're standing in line with all the other inmates, hopefully getting ready to actually be able to get a shower, or you're trying to make a phone call. And it's not easy to make a phone call with nowadays because nobody remembers anybody's phone numbers. So I didn't have a vast amount of numbers in my portfolio to call to even seek help. So I was pretty much on my own. And I was also going through withdrawal from a lot of these drugs that I was taking. At the time that I was arrested, I was at a music festival. What I used to do was I used to travel with the Grateful Dead, Fish, and some other jam bands around the United States. And I was one of the people who would bring drugs there to sell, called them party favors, and made sure that everybody had a good time. Well, one of these festivals got raided by the cops. I was one of the very first people to get arrested. Um, and so I went from using these drugs every day to stopping pretty much overnight. And I was going through a lot of withdrawal symptoms. And if you've ever been by yourself or just sat in a room with no sound, no walls, no stimulations, and your mind starts to talk to you again, you start to go crazy. Even the most sane people, if you lock them in a room for more than a couple hours, all the emotions are going to start to release. You're going to start to cry. You're going to yell. You're starting to think about every bad decision you ever made in your life. And I was almost putting myself through a literal mental hell. But in this 90 days that I was in this facility where they were trying to figure out how severe I was, the only books that you were allowed to read were religious books, whether it be the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, the Bhagavad Gita, the Rig Vedas, um, all the Four Agreements were there too. So any like spiritual texts you were allowed to read. You weren't allowed to read any fictional books or anything like that. And the only way that you were allowed out of your cell during any of this time was if you went to a religious service, whether it be, Christian, going to church, or um, going to any of these other religious events they would offer there. So I was signing up for everything just so I could get out of the room
Sure.
because the room was that was my hell at that point. Well, one of the very first ones I went to, one of the first meetings was a Buddhist and meditation teacher coming, and um, I was fascinated with it because he taught us just some simple um, breath work practices and how to sit and how to just hold your hands, how to hold your body. It was very simple. Not There wasn't too much about it, but within that first 5 minutes of meditating, all of a sudden, I wasn't in that hell. I wasn't in, I wasn't going through the inner dialogue of where I was beating myself up for all the bad decisions I made through my life that got me put into this position. And and it interested me. I was raised Christian. I went to church every single Sunday, multiple days a week. I was raised to go to church camp every summer for weeks on end. And I knew a lot about that, but I also was very intrigued about every other spiritual belief out there. So I was taking this opportunity as a way for me to understand all religious practices. And within the first couple weeks of this meditation teacher coming to the facility to teach us, at the end of the session, you would have a couple minutes where you could talk to him and just ask him questions and get a better understanding of the things that you're seeking. And so I started telling him about, like my beliefs and how I believe that everything is connected. And he would tell me, he's like, you're very enlightened for a person who hasn't practiced this type of spiritual practice. And he's like, where did you learn this from? And through my years of going to Grateful Dead shows and selling drugs, I've taken my fair share of psychedelics. And I've had those epiphanies that everybody seeks to go into, the jungle and drink ayahuasca and get that spiritual enlightenment. I've had those situations. I didn't, at the time, I wasn't taking those substances for that reason. I was taking them to party, but sometimes you take too much and sometimes you get a little bit more than what you were asking for. And people may call those bad trips, but those were life-changing events for me. And I look back on them and I think of them as blessings because I wouldn't be the person that I am today if it wasn't for that. And after these couple meetings, I told him one of the biggest reasons that or the biggest discomforts I was having while I was sitting in meditation was my physical body. I couldn't sit still or I'd have a lot of discomfort, especially in my hips and my neck and my shoulders. And that's when he introduced me to yoga. And then he told me that, you know, these experiences that you were seeking with drugs can be found with just the power of your breath. And he would teach me a few little, like box breathing or just focusing on the belly, just in and out, just little little things that would point me in the right direction. And then one day he told me if you want to go real far, and he showed me like the beginning steps of holotropic breathing. And it was very intriguing because as soon as he would teach me any of these things, the first thing I would do is go to my cell and start practicing. And when you're locked in your cell for 23 hours a day with nothing else to do, you have plenty of time to put all these little teachings to practice. And what the biggest epiphany I had was this was about a week after getting taught the introduction to holotropic breathing. I was sitting in my cell, sitting up with my back against the wall, sitting on my cot. And I didn't have a cellie, or no, I did have a cellie at the time that he would always get upset with me when I would start these breathing exercises because it would, sometimes I would start like shaking a little bit or, I would turn flush, I'd start sweating. So he thought that I was doing
It's
some
like,
type of
what's going
weird
on with this
spiritual,
guy?
yeah. Yeah, he was getting all weirded out, and he would always like ask me to stop, and I was like, like I don't ask you to stop or doing anything, so just let me do this. But one night I was sitting there, he was dead asleep, and I was doing this breath work. And I remember I was getting really into it, and and then my meditation teacher told me, they said, um, to really experience this, you have to let go of all restraints of the breath. Just allow the breath completely come into your body and to completely leave it every single time you take an inhale and an exhale. And try to make sure that it's fluid, that there's no pauses at the stop, no pauses at the bottom, that everything is like a fluid motion, like a wave of energy. And it's hard when you first get into any of this because as soon as you start doing anything and you start feeling weird, your mind takes over and you start analyzing everything. But this was like the one time where my mind started analyzing stuff, and I was like, no, dedicate yourself to the breath. And I remember I was in the breath work and I started feeling all tingly. My body started feeling like it was almost dissolving, like it felt like this heaviness was falling off of me. And I remember breathing out and letting go of my breath and looking down at my lap. And all of a sudden, I felt this suction, like I was getting lifted above myself. And when I was above myself, I could also see the things beyond the walls of
Mm.
the cell. I could see on the left side of me was the outside. On both sides, the front and back of me, there was two cells, and on the right side was the day room that had some tables, the telephones, the showers, and everything. But I was above it. I could see the walls. I could see 360 degrees around me.
Yeah.
And every couple hours, the CO or correctional officer would have to go around and do counts. And
Mm-hmm.
from above, and you can't hear much that's outside of these rooms because they're so padded, they're so thick walled. So you really don't know when count's about to happen. I remember looking up or being above there, looking down and seeing the CO start to come through the pod, making his rounds of checks. And I could see like the people in the cells, and you're supposed to be like in your bed, like lying down whenever they do these counts. So you could see the people that were playing cards and everybody like acting like they were, as they were coming, they would start to scuffle and like get underneath their bed or throw the covers over top of them. And I could see all this happening as the CO was walking towards me. I remember looking down in the cell of the people right next to me, and they were playing cards. And I remember the thing that was funny is because the thing that drew me to them is because they were arguing, and one of them was accusing the other one of cheating. And I could literally see the card sitting underneath, like beside his leg on the other side of him.
So you knew he was cheating. Yeah.
And so I knew he was cheating. And the cellie was accusing him of cheating.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the CO's coming down, like flashing the light inside of the rooms, and they, scuffle and hide all the cards and throw the blankets over them. And I'm still sitting up because I'm in shock of all this stuff that's happening. And
Yeah.
so I'm still sitting up. The way that I get woken up is him pounding the mag light on the window. And as
Yeah.
soon as he pounds that mag light on the window, I drop back down
Back.
to my
Mm-hmm.
and I look over him and the light's shining in my face and I'm at awe, like I'm like, what's going on here? This is, you know,
Yeah.
hard to explain. And so like I'm like, all right, I pull the cover over me, I lay down, but like I can't sleep after this.
Sure.
So like I'm up until and like I'm talking to myself because I was like, what the heck was that? What
Yeah.
the heck was that?
Yeah.
And then my bunkie wakes up, because I'm talking to myself and he already thinks I'm crazy. And and I was just outside the cell. And he was like, no, you weren't. You were sitting here the whole time. And I was like, our neighbors, they're playing cards and they're cheating. And he's like, what are you talking about? So
Yeah.
I lay there until 6 a.m. when chow is served. And to do the morning count before they hand you your tray, you have to come out of your cell to make sure that everybody's alive.
Mm-hmm.
So one person stands on the left side, the other person on the right side. So when I come out of my cell, I go to the left and I look over at the two people next to me, my neighbors that were playing the card game and cheating. And the guy was cheating. I look over at him and I was like, he was cheating. He had the ace of spades underneath his leg. And they both turned and looked at me and their jaws dropped. And they were like, wait a minute, could you hear us arguing? And they were like, no, I seen it. And then they were like, what do you mean you've seen it? And then they're,
Yeah.
like you're not supposed to talk to each other out
Yeah.
there. So then like the COs were like, shut up, everybody quiet. And we go around. And then like after that point is when I knew there was something more to all these ancient practices, that something doesn't stand the test of time for this long if there isn't meaning to it, if there isn't substance to it. you know? And so it made me dive down those paths even deeper. So pretty much the entire time I was in prison, I was practicing meditation, yoga, and breath work, reading every spiritual book that I could possibly get my hands on. Um, and that's how I turned my one addiction of substances and partying at music festivals into an addiction of spiritual enlightenment and seeking the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. What an incredible story, and what an incredible, like so many incredible stories within this one incredible journey that you've had, John. And there's a few things that really stood out to me. And first, I just want to take a breath with you to
Yeah.
digest all of this. Yeah. So, the first thing that really caught my attention was you that detox that you went through, like having, so I have for listeners, I have experience, I have a few different experiences. I was one of these people who went into a maximum security prison for a few years with part of a program bringing in this type of work. So,
Mhm.
John, having done that, like sometimes I question, like was it for anything? Did anybody get anything out of it? And then, so sitting across from you right now and hearing the story from you, from somebody who was eager to learn, from somebody bringing in these practices and just seeing and experiencing the way that it totally changed the trajectory of your life. It inspires me. It's like such important work. Yeah, it's really inspiring, and it highlights how, you spoke to, there's like this 1 hour a day and you can wait in line for, and let me know if I got this wrong, but you can wait in line for a shower, you can wait in
Mhm.
line for the phone, or you can go to to like a religious or spiritual service, or is that like something that you get to do at a different time?
That was at different time. You would have to sign up for
Okay.
them. Every day there would be like one or two services of some sort that you can leave the cell for, but there
Sure.
was always limited space.
Yeah.
Um, so like only so many people could leave, and I would always try to be the first person to sign that I wanted to leave.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine there's other requirements as well. Like you have to be, good behavior.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and things along those lines. So you have, like even in this most difficult, difficult place to be in, um, you still have a choice. A person still has a choice on how to utilize that time. You can utilize it, like you said, just like being in this hell and beating myself up for the choices that I made to get here, or playing cards or doing whatever,
Mhm.
or can make a choice to try to like learn something that will support the personal growth and support you feeling better. Going
Yeah.
to that one meditation class, and it doesn't always happen that fast, but going to that one meditation class and having just in the first few minutes the mind turn into a friendlier place. I imagine that was such a profound moment for you.
Yes, it was a tremendous moment because most of the time my mind sent me into places I didn't want to go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
nowadays it's hard for, if you talk to anybody and you would just ask them to like sit in silence, that you see like almost a sense of fear come over their face because of the place our minds can go. And this was the first time that I was able, if not to necessarily control where my mind went, but sit from an outside point of view and view it from an observer point of view instead of being in the thralls of it.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, so diving into all of that, but before, I just want to also acknowledge, having I have my own history of addiction, and so I went back to a time where I was like coming down off of something and like thought I was seeing spiders all over all
Mhm.
over the walls, and I was freaking out like horrible, horrible, horrible. And then having worked in a facility that supports detoxing and knowing what people go through, again, from my personal and from a clinical perspective, the fact that you were like on whatever you were on for how many days, and then you're just in a cell without any support in that detox process, but just like going through it on your own. Oh my gosh, that sounds inhumane.
Yeah, it is for sure. I don't think anybody deserves that type of treatment that you get when you go to prison.
No. No, you certainly don't
And if you
deserve
look
it.
at the history and the percentage of people that go into those situations and that just return, it's obvious that it doesn't work.
No. Well, prisons are for profit.
Yes.
They're for profit organizations. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother rabbit hole we can go down, but um Ah, yeah, bad memory. Like I've seen a lot, having gone into prison, I've seen a lot. I've seen more than I wanted to see. And yeah, I think it is important to go here because because my experience of going into women's prison, it made me almost quit everything that I'm doing and go back to school to get like a master's degree or a PhD or something so that I could learn how to go and rewrite like legal policy so that
Mhm.
I could somehow change the way that the system is so that people would not be treated this way. Um, because most people I'm going to say everybody, maybe 1% who might be just, born sociopathic, but most people who are in prison have trauma, a history of trauma in their background, and or, drug addiction or abuse, but trauma, trauma first, and then, addiction and abuse. And so it's a completely different approach, one that helps people to overcome the addiction and heal and integrate the past traumatic experiences. And so you had that. I don't know if that person, your meditation teacher, I mean, I'm sure they knew what they were doing. But you were lucky enough to, even though it wasn't with that box on it, that title on it, you were lucky enough to connect with that and then to go down this path that leads to the healing.
Yeah. Well, I had that same feeling. I mean, I was raised a Christian, and when you're in church and everybody is in the same collective consciousness, there is a feeling that you have that there's something bigger,
Mm.
and you feel that connection to source. But I've also had that same feeling standing in front of a stage, listening to music. And I had that same feeling when I meditated for that first time. And that's how I knew that there was something, that there wasn't only one way to reach source or to reach the collective consciousness or higher self. And just I feel like if we start to understand all the different facets of it and different religious or spiritual practices, when we start to bring them all together and treat them as looking towards the same thing instead of separated, we would understand more of why we're here and what all this is.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for bringing that in as well. So, because you did mention growing up in church and having that Christian background, um, and it's really beautiful to hear that you had that feeling of I'm going to use the word oneness, that feeling of connection, that feeling of there's something greater. And then wait, I'm also experiencing this, you know, I'm also experiencing this with music in front of a stage, and now I'm experiencing this with meditation. Now I'm experiencing this with breath, and taking it even further and seeing even more what's capable. And yeah, what's coming up for me when connecting with this is that, I also believe that a lot of these spiritual religious practices, um, even if we don't put that name on it,
Mhm.
even if we're just saying breath work or meditation without connecting it to a spiritual
Mhm.
lineage or name, um, it's just like a different language. It's just like a language that, right? Like it's if I'm Japanese,
Mhm.
then that's what I'm hearing, and that's what I'm connecting with. And like considering it as like different languages or different things that are speaking to different people based on where they are at in their level of consciousness or their cultural upbringing or their community where they are and what is available to them. There's so many different roads to awakening, to connection, to recognizing that there's so much more. What what would you say what would you say keeps people from being open to that deeper explore? I don't there's like two questions here. On their own, connecting with that deeper levels, deeper layers of themselves, these deeper practices. I know you said like just sitting still and being quiet, like all the stuff goes in the mind, all the stuff in the mind comes up. So there's that. And then what do you also believe um, keeps people from being able to see or recognize or respect that other people's ideologies or ways of doing things can be just as beneficial?
Hmm. I think one of the things, obviously, like our beliefs are taught to us, everything that we believe is taught to us, as we're raised. And we, when we're first coming up in this world, we look at the only people that really know more than us is our parents, and we look at them for safety and comfort, and that they have all the answers because they're ours and they're here to take care of us. And when we're little kids, we think that our parents and our, whether it be our caregivers, our babysitters, our Sunday school teachers, we all think that these people of authority have all the answers because they've experienced more of this life than we have. And especially here, I think in America, where like we're taught from a very young age that like we're separate from the rest of the world, that we're better than everybody else. You get taught to like be a patriot, and how there's like these imaginary walls. You get taught from a very young age that there's separation between us. Um, I was born in West Virginia in the hills of the Appalachian Mountains, and everybody around there is pretty racist. And uh, I don't have anything against anybody of color, but if I never left West Virginia, I'm sure I wouldn't be the same. I wouldn't have the same viewpoints as what I have now. And a lot of these things that keep us separated too, are all these distractions, keep us from looking for the answers within inside of ourselves and how we really feel. Because, we get indoctrinated with a belief. Well, I was raised as a Christian, that, stealing is bad and all this, sex is bad out of marriage, but it feels really good if it's in marriage type of situation. But I didn't have to have anybody tell me that if somebody took something from me, it hurt me. There's a feeling inside of me that like, oh, that hurt that you would do something like that to me. Nobody had to teach me that. And and I feel like that's where we start to lose that connection of seeking into ourselves, is because we're taught from a very young age that the people of authority have the answers and we don't know anything. And we don't give ourselves enough opportunity to learn from ourselves either, because we don't quiet the outside world down long enough to hear our inner true voice speak. We have so many distractions nowadays with our devices, with our jobs, with all these things that are disconnecting us from source further and further. And I think a lot of it has to do with trauma that we're running from, as not just with ourselves, but with our collective trauma, with our ancestral trauma getting passed down from, you know, generation to generation. Is the reason it's getting worse and worse is because nobody's taken the opportunity to slow down and look inside themselves for the answers. So, like, I think the reason the world is so crazy and so astronomically weird at this moment in time is because we're all just running away from our traumas and trying to disconnect from them instead of trying to find out the source of where we came from and the root of why we are who we are. Um, and I think it's just an opportunity for us to, you have to set aside a part of the day to quiet your mind, to quiet your body, to slow everything down, and just to sit in stillness. I think that's a big feat for anybody nowadays, is just to sit in stillness. And I think like one of the biggest things when people ask, because I teach meditation, one of the first things that I have them do is just to sit. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm not asking you to even worry about your breath or to control it. I just want you to sit and just sit and allow your mind to just wander. Allow it to go for a little bit and just see where it goes. Because we don't even give ourselves that opportunity nowadays. We don't even know what being bored is anymore. Like kids have no clue what being bored is. Like there's always something to do. There's always some distraction. And I think one of the biggest things that keeps me not chasing, but seeking this connection is because it reminds me of when I was a little kid and I was bored and I didn't have all the distractions. And my imagination was just allowed to run free. And I had imaginary friends. I had forts that were extravagant in my mind, but probably were just a bunch of sticks put together in the woods, but it was a fortress to me. It was a kingdom. And I missed that type of play and that type of imagination. And I think like that's it, almost like my meditation and breathwork practice allows me to explore my consciousness and reminds me of being a little kid again.
I love
I
that.
don't, I don't know if that answered anything, but
It answered all of it. I mean, it was so, yeah, it was really beautiful. You spoke to how we take on, we learn from our parents, we learn from the people who are, around us. We look up who we are looking up to when we're growing up, and we're taking on their beliefs, we're taking on their ideas about the world, and highlighting that that for so many generations things have
Mhm.
been getting crazier and crazier and crazier and faster paced, and we've been more inundated with technology and media and consumerism and the ideas of separation and all of this, and that is just gets compounded and compounded and compounded on the little person developing, and can make it even harder to just stop. And
Yeah.
I love what you said about, a lot of people, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, they think that meditation is to sit there and try to make my mind quiet, right? Like I try to meditate, but I can't make my mind quiet, And it's like, well, yeah, don't think about a pink elephant either,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
Like, um, so I love that advice to just let your mind wander, just
Yeah.
let it go and just like
Yeah.
see what's there. It gives me this, it's like so much permission and freedom, and it's taking away the pressure that like the mind has to be quiet, but it's like, oh, I can just, meditation is to become like really in observance of, and absorbed in what it is, that like fully present with what is there. And so now you're from, instead of just the thoughts driving the ship, now you're sitting back here watching them, more aware of them.
Yeah.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you talking about building the forts and playing and being a kid in nature, it brought me back to your food forest and kids being bored. Like, what if every family was out there creating food forests? Then the kids would, because my brother has a hemp farm, and they have 10 acres, and those little boys, my little nephews, are just out, they're outside all the time. They're playing, they're catching bugs, they're
Hmm.
they're digging, they're farming, they're doing all the things, and it's really beautiful to witness and to know that yeah, that kids are getting to grow up, like these kids are getting to grow up like this, where so many are like just in front of a screen all day. But yeah, it makes me think of like, what would it be like if everybody had a food, a food forest, or and was just like outside, just in wonder of like the things that are growing and the bugs that are there, and just playing more. um, yeah, so those are all the things I'm thinking of. So I feel like you've already given some really great suggestion or advice, but as we'll start to close out here, what more would you offer to people who are recognizing the value and the importance of just, yeah, I need to stop moving 1,000 million miles an hour and just, start. I want to feel more peace. I want to feel more connected. I want um, to be able to have a little bit of what John has. What other pieces of advice would you offer?
If you feel like your life is out of control, that you don't have the reins on on your horse, set a time of the day that's dedicated to you and nobody else. Not your dog, not your cat, not your boyfriend, not your girlfriend, not your kids, nobody else. There's a time of the day that nobody can bother you. And make it sacred. Make it so you mark it off. You turn your phone off so you have no distractions, that nobody can interrupt you at this time. And just start off small. Start off with just sit in silence and stillness. It can be journaling, it could be prayer, it could be meditation, it could be any number of things that is just for you and nobody else. And the more that you work on this and the more you dedicate just a part of the day for you, other things in your life will start to fall into place. All these things, that this picture of this life that you want, that you imagine your life can be, isn't going to be there when you're distracted all the time. But when you set aside a moment of the day, whether it's just to quiet your mind, you don't even have to plan out the future, just being part of the silence and the stillness allows you to then step out of that practice with a clear mind to go then incorporate your next step into accomplishing your goal. So if you feel a little out of place, a little lost in this world, and you don't have any control, trust me, you're supposed to be here. And just taking time for yourself, you will figure out why. And you'll start to put more of your energy into yourself and stop giving your energy to the things that are taken away from you. I think that's it.
That's great, John. Thank you so much. Well, you're at Evolve.
Yeah.
You're at
Yep.
Evolve. Is there any, yeah, how can people connect with you? How can people find you, reach out to you if they want to? Yeah, what would be the best ways for people to reach you?
Yeah. So locally, if you're in Ocala, you just stop by Evolve Power Yoga. It's on Magnolia Avenue. You can also go on our website at evolvepoweryoga.com, which will have our schedule. If you want to connect with me digitally, I'm on Instagram at Addis John. That's ADDISJAHN. We can connect that way, and that's about it.
Okay, great. And I will put those links beneath this episode so that people can very easily click on them and go to Evolve's website or go to your Instagram.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you so much again, John, for sitting down with me. I didn't even mention this month is Men's Mental Health Awareness. And so originally I thought I would ask you some questions about just things that men and boys deal with, but we went this direction and it was beautiful and it was wonderful. And maybe we'll have another conversation and go in that direction.
Yeah, we can always have conversations.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, and talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to One Breath Wisdom. If something in today's episode spoke to you, I would love to know it. Send me a message on Instagram at One Breath Institute or at Lisa McNett, and please share the episode with someone else who needs to hear it. Remember, you are not here to carry it all. You are here to come home to yourself, one breath at a time. Until next time, take a breath and be well.